mind, Russia had always been the enemy.
There was never, from about 2 weeks from the time I took charge of this project, any illusion on my part that Russia was our enemy. And the project was conducted on that basis.
In June, scientists at Chicago's Met Lab drafted a report warning that a nuclear attack on Japan would not only destroy America's moral position, but would instigate a nuclear arms race with the Soviet Union. The report also noted that because there was no secret to the bomb, the Soviet Union would soon catch up. When security officers banned its circulation, Szilard drafted a petition to Truman signed by 155 project scientists. But Robert Oppenheimer barred its circulation at Los Alamos and alerted Groves, who made sure the petition did not reach Truman. Groves's security agents had been conducting extensive surveillance of Szilard throughout the war, and at one point Groves had labeled Szilard an enemy alien and requested that he be interned for the duration of the war. In May 45, General Marshall supported Oppenheimer's suggestion to share information with Soviet scientists, if not his proposal to invite Soviet observers to the test. But Burns, in any case, vetoed the whole idea. The bomb's use now seemed inexorable, unstoppable, and came to an apocalyptic head in Potsdam in July, where the Big Three were discussing the shape of the post-war world. It was the perfect place to reveal the existence of the bomb. The conference setting was strange and otherworldly. Soviet troops occupied the wrecked capital of Berlin. Truman had said his primary reason for going to Potsdam was to ensure the Soviet entry into the Pacific War, an assurance that Stalin was ready to give again. Truman wrote in his diary,
"He'll be in the Jap war on August 15th. Beanie Japs when that comes about."
Allied intelligence concurred, reporting an entry of the Soviet Union into the war would finally convince the Japanese of the inevitability of complete defeat. Truman had delayed the start of Potsdam for 2 weeks, giving the scientists time to ready the bomb test. It worked. Stimson gave him the news. The conference began the very next day. He later read the full report. The test was terrifying, almost beyond comprehension. Truman's demeanor changed completely. Churchill was stunned by the transformation.
"I couldn't understand it. It was a changed man. He told the Russians just where they got on and off, and generally bossed the whole meeting."
On the 24th of July, Truman informed Stalin that the United States was in possession of a new weapon of unusual destructive force.
Mr. President, I remember that you told Stalin at Potsdam that we had the atomic bomb.
Yes.
Did he seem to be impressed at that time?
No. I don't think he quite understood what I was talking about. I told him that we had discovered a tremendously powerful explosive and that we proposed to use it to end the war with Japan. And he smiled and said he was very happy to hear it, and then the conversation ended, and I went my way and he went his.
But Truman was naive in this matter. Klaus Fuchs, a man of ideological conviction who was part of the British scientific mission at Alamogordo, had delivered technical information relating to the bomb to his Soviet handlers. Stalin already knew when the test had been scheduled, and now was being told it had succeeded. Anthony Eaton, British Foreign Secretary, noted Stalin's response to Truman was a nod and a muttered thank you. Apparently, once he stepped away from the conference, Stalin called his secret police chief, Beria, and scolded him for not having told him of this success of the test before Truman. Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko reported that when Stalin returned to his villa, he remarked that the Americans would use their atomic monopoly now to dictate terms in Europe, but that he wouldn't give in to that blackmail. He ordered Soviet military forces to speed their entry into the Asian War, and he ordered Soviet scientists to pick up the pace of their research. Truman's behavior at Potsdam reinforced Stalin's belief that the U.S. intended to end the war quickly and renege on its promised concessions in the Pacific. On July the 25th, Truman approved a directive signed by Stimson and Marshall, ordering the atomic bomb to be used against Japan as soon after August 3rd as the weather permitted. He and Burns fully expected the Japanese government to reject the Potsdam Declaration, which failed to give any reassurances about the emperor. The U.S. even vetoed Stalin's wish to sign the declaration. Adding Stalin's signature would have signaled the Japanese that the Soviet Union was about to come into the war. It was incredibly underhanded behavior by the U.S., both towards the Japanese and the USSR. While the hours were ticking off until the atomic bomb was ready to use, the absence of a Soviet signature was encouraging the Japanese to continue their futile diplomatic efforts since May of that year to keep the Soviets out of the war, knowing that the entry of their giant army would crush the Japanese empire. Stimson, who had serious misgivings about using the bomb, referring to it as the dreadful, the terrible, the diabolical, repeatedly tried to convince Truman and Burns to assure the Japanese about the emperor, but it was an exercise in futility. When Stimson complained to Truman about being ignored, Truman told his elderly, frail Secretary of War that if he didn't like it, he could pack his bags and go home. Though Truman always somewhat proudly accepted responsibility for his decision, Groves, who drafted the final order to drop the bomb, contended that Truman didn't really decide.
As far as I was concerned, his decision was one of non-interference. Basically, a decision not to accept the existing plans. Truman did not so much say yes as not say no.
He described Truman scornfully as a little boy on a toboggan. Truman's attitude in all this was puzzling. Though at times treating the bomb as a poker hand to hold over Stalin's head, he also understood that it was really a sword of Damocles hanging over all humanity. He wrote in his Potsdam diary,
We have discovered the most terrible bomb in the history of the world. It may be the fire destruction prophesied in the Euphrates Valley era, after Noah and his fabulous ark.
6 of America's 7 five-star officers who received their final star in World War II declared the bomb morally reprehensible, militarily unnecessary, or both. Eisenhower said,
So then Stimson told me they were going to drop it on the Japanese. I listened. I didn't volunteer anything because, after all, my war was over in Europe, and it wasn't up to me. But I was against it on 2 counts. First, the Japanese were ready to surrender, and it wasn't necessary to hit them with that awful thing. Second, I hated to see our country be the first to use such a weapon.
General MacArthur, Supreme Commander of Allied forces in the Pacific, considered the bomb completely unnecessary from a military point of view. He later said that the Japanese would have surrendered in May if the U.S. had told them they could keep the emperor. Opposition was sufficiently known that Groves imposed a requirement that U.S. commanders in the field clear all statements on the bombings with the War Department.
After 3 years of the highest tension,
We didn't want MacArthur and others saying the war could have been won without the bomb.
Ironically, shortly after the war was over, General Curtis Demon LeMay said,
Even without the atomic bomb and the Russian entry into the war, Japan would have surrendered in 2 weeks. The atomic bomb had nothing to do with the end of the war.
The Target Committee had selected a number of sites on the Japanese mainland. Stimson removed Kyoto, the ancient cultural capital, which was spared its fate over the strong opposition of Groves. It was a city of Hiroshima that was decided upon. It had been deliberately left undamaged by LeMay's bombers. Here the U.S. could showcase its new weapon. On August 6th, at 2:45 a.m., 3 B-29s took off from the island of Tinian for Japan. The lead plane, the Enola Gay, carried the Iranian bomb, Little Boy. Pilot Paul Tibbets named the plane after his mother. 6.5 hours later, Enola Gay came into sight of its target. Doom City lay quiet in flooding early morning sunshine. Hiroshima's 300,000 civilians, 43,000 soldiers, and 45,000 Korean slave laborers were just beginning their day. The target was a bridge near the center of the city. At 8:15, right on schedule, the giant plane went into its bombing run at 31,000 feet, speed 330 miles per hour. As the bomb was released, the plane twisted violently to get as far as possible from the blast. At the last minute, a gust of wind blew the bomb, carrying it towards Shima Hospital at one end of the bridge. The bomb fell almost 5 miles to 2,000 feet, and then two masses of uranium came together at lightning speed and turned to energy. The plane, now 9 miles away, was battered by the shock wave. The fireball expanded outward, enveloping the densely populated center of the city. Its intense heat and blast driving outward to shatter buildings and ignite all debris. The bomb totally destroyed an area extending approximately 1.2 miles in all directions. An hour and a half later, from almost 400 miles away, the crew could look back and still see the mushroom cloud rearing up to 40,000 feet or more. At the hypocenter, where temperatures reached 5,400 degrees Fahrenheit, the fireball roasted people to bundles of smoking black char in a fraction of a second as their internal organs boiled away. Tens of thousands were killed instantly. An estimated 140,000 were dead by the end of the year, and 200,000 by 1950. The U.S. officially reported only 3,243 Japanese troops killed. Among the casualties were 23 American prisoners of war, some of whom survived the blast, only to be beaten to death by bomb survivors. When the bomb had exploded at Hiroshima, Truman, aboard the Augusta, had gone from one crew member to another, telling them the great news like a town crier.
This is the greatest thing in history.
Responding to this, Catholic lay worker and pacifist Dorothy Day wrote,
"We have killed 318,000 Japanese. Mr. Truman was jubilant. President Truman. True man. What a strange name, come to think of it. We refer to Jesus Christ as true God and true man. Truman is a true man of his time, in that he was jubilant."
But the Japanese did not surrender. Stalin, honoring his pledge to Roosevelt and having now moved 1.5 million men to the Eastern Front, attacked Japan on August 9th on 3 fronts in Manchuria. The fighting was bloody.